Welcome everyone to the 2025 iteration of the Gerety Awards Jury Insight session. For those of you who may not know, the Gerety Awards, named after Mary Frances Gerety, I believe, the copywriter who in 1948 coined the term slogan, "A diamond is forever," is the only award that I'm aware of that brings together an all-female jury of respected subject matter experts and leaders to reward creative excellence in advertising and communications from a woman's perspective. Sessions are held around the world with international executive juries comprising of agency leaders and brand leaders who determine a shortlist of finalists. The finalists should be announced shortly. This shortlist is then submitted to a grand jury of creative experts for a final evaluation. The votes of this international grand jury will then determine the Grand Prix, gold, silver, and bronze winners of the competition. From what I'm told, again, entries are judged on the originality of creative ideas and the quality of executions. Joining us today are four top leaders representing a larger jury for the Middle East and Africa at the Gerety Awards 2025. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you here today. Dina Rizzetti, Group Executive Director, Marketing and Communications at Modan Holding UAE. Akriti Goel, Head of Strategy and Insights at Leo Burnett MEA. Leo MEA, I think it's been renamed to, rebranded to Noordeep, Creative Director at FP7 McCann UAE. And Sarah A, Regional Creative Director, Service Plan, Saudi Arabia. I'm Anup Omin, and I'll be the moderator today. I'm the editor of Campaign Middle East, and I have the distinct pleasure of picking all of these wonderful brains today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. Just a quick note before you speak, please remember to unmute yourself, and we'll dive straight into it. I'll start with you, Akriti. So, what does it take for the work that you're reviewing to make the cut, and how has this evaluation criteria, what it takes to make the cut, evolved over the years?
Okay, so I mean, I guess maybe we can start off with the obvious truth, right? And I know you were talking about it, that the criteria for Gerety is creativity, is innovation. And of course, to make the cut, the work still has to be incredibly creative. You know, it still has to be brave, it has to be sharp, it has to be meaningful. You know, it has to still stir something in people, whether it's emotionally making them feel some way or behaviorally making them do some way. That will always be the price of entry. That will always be what it takes to make the cut. But I think what has really evolved and, you know, what has really made this year a lot more exciting has been the fact that that expression of creativity feels like it's become a lot more unrestrained. You know, it's like the constraints, the shackles have been taken off of creativity. You know, it didn't feel like we saw any ideas that fit neatly into predefined molds. You know, we were no longer in a world where a lot of the work that we saw, it didn't in fact look like advertising, and that was fine. You know, we saw product innovations, we saw cultural collaborations. I think there was even like AI activations and browser plugins and documentaries, you know, all different forms of commercial creativity, you know, all of them still driving that business impact, shifting behavior, creating brand value, right? So it really felt that that one big shift was that creativity was not staying in its own lane, and I thought that was quite good.
That's cool. Noor, do you want to add to that? I like that aspect of creativity not staying in its lane, of being disruptive, of being different, of, pushing the envelope, so to speak, in that sense. But from your viewpoint, as one of the jury members of a larger collective in the Middle East, what did it take to make that cut? Like, what were you looking for that differentiated each submission?
So for me, the first thing I consider and the first thing I look for is like, what's the purpose of this? Is it purpose driven? Does it enact change? Does it have a greater like value than just being something that, as Akriti was saying, yes, it's creative, yes, it's funny, yes, it's nice to look at, yes, it's something that drives business, but does it also enact a stem from a real world problem and give people an actionable solution, give them something to actually do about this problem. And I'm not necessarily saying it has to solve the issue, right? But at least take those first steps towards change, even if they're like baby steps. My biggest pet peeve with a lot of entries that this used to happen more so in the past and less so now is when advertisers create a problem so that they can solve it. We can tell, the consumers can tell. Like it's thank goodness not happening as much because the newer generations are a lot more media literate, they're a lot more switched on, they're a lot more cynical, which I think is a good thing. So that just ups the bar for all of the entries that had to pass, and when I look at the purpose, that's what really resonates with me. And again, when I say purpose driven, I don't mean that a law has to be rewritten with the government or something. It could be something like a behavioral change, as what Akriti mentioned as well. It could be saving a dying business. It could be something as basic as awareness, as long as the purpose of that awareness is, in the case of one of the entries that we saw, normalization of the topic. So if the purpose really stems from a real world problem and it leads somewhere, and I'm not left thinking, okay, and then that is something that could make the cut for me. And this has, the bar of what that means has definitely been up and up year on year. And I feel that a lot of the entries that we had this year definitely made that cut. And a lot of them were oddly in healthcare. Like I think more than half of the shortlists we had were in the healthcare section, that we're used to, or at least I'm used to seeing pretty average mundane work coming out of the healthcare genre, but they really upped the game this year, and used like new alternative medias and created new products and smart tech and use of AI that was not just for the use of AI. So it really turned something like mundane into something very effective and very purpose driven and very with a cause. And for me, that is the bar that needs to be passed to really make the cut.
I think there's so much to peel from these two answers that you've given me. Love the concept of purpose driven. I think as I mean, this is a theme that has started globally and then come to the region, and we've grown from within the region as well. There's theme of moving beyond just creativity for the sake of time and attention and grabbing people's attention to creative effectiveness. Like, what were the objectives set? Have we met those objectives? And I think as marketers, it's also nice to take a step back and say, what are we actually trying to solve for? At the end of the day, is this really about customer experience? Is this about customer acquisition? Is this about customer retention? Is it about emotionally connecting with communities? And it's lovely to see that from the work that's going on that you've reviewed as well. Dina and Sarah, I'd love to bring you into this conversation as well. You have this unique opportunity, so to speak, to see all of these submissions come. And as much as we are judging it, and I say this to my god kids as well as, and Noor mentioned this, we're speaking to a generation that's become extremely vocal, but also acts on what they say. They're actively following and adding UGC to brands, but they're also actively boycotting where they don't see it fit, right? And it's interesting from your perspective because you get to see all of these submissions. But like I told my god kids, as much as we see them, we're also learning from them, right? So in that sense, what are your top takeaways from this experience of being jury, from everything that you've seen and experienced within this journey?
The thing is, this year's entries, you would actually feel this like great transition, or let's say evolution that is happening. Now, we know that this is something we see year after year, but this year has been actually mind-blowing. And let's say, if I want to put it in short, it did give me a lot of hope. And I am personally very proud of this young generation because I believe they are doing a lot of the things that we secretly wanted to do, for a long time. So this is very refreshing, and they are actually giving us a stage so that, let's say, we create and we be this much, let's say, we have really high standards. They're making actually our standards really high. And this year's entries now, they give me a lot of hope, but also pause. And on the positive side, I've seen entries that genuinely stayed with me since the moment I watched them. And one, let's say, entry that really comes to mind is Coca-Cola's. Now, I know we're going to see this, we can actually, everyone can see it right now, right? So the great thing about it is that now first it's a B2B category, and in the B2B, I'd like to speak about this maybe later. I'll stay on this point in the beginning. Now, some of the entries were simply brilliant marketing solutions, but others went further, adding real and tangible value to their communities. And another striking pattern that I really appreciated is the way innovation and technology were not just add-ons, but fundamental to solving problems. AI, for example, isn't just a buzzword. It actually was embedded in ideas in a very thoughtful and relevant way. And another, let's say, refreshing shift is the diversity, the sheer diversity. And when we talk about diversity, it's not only in the different regions, let's say, but the type of brands, the types of causes, and the different cultural context, which actually really builds on this learning experience, not only on the work, but beyond that. And this richness of perspective really shaped the storytelling and the tone of voice of the work in general. Now, of course, not everything was rosy. And here I want to second something that Noor mentioned. Something that continues to trouble me is the presence of staged or insincere work. Now, in short, this undermines the whole purpose of these awards, which is actually to recognize authentic, courageous creativity that truly solve problems. And it's about integrity, really, not perfection.
Dina?
Thank you for that, Sarah. A lot of the top takeaways for me echo a lot of what has been discussed here as well. But what was striking for me is that brands want to do a lot more than achieve commercial success. In a lot of the work we saw, there was a genuine push for either creating awareness or creating bold messaging and creative storytelling that handled a lot of difficult topics that are not usually brought to the surface. And a lot of them, as Sarah said, have stayed with me. I mean, some of the things that were discussed are difficult topics that we don't reach even in our society. Things like specific women healthcare issues that we all live with every day, but we don't discuss. And there were a lot of bold brands that actually brought a lot of things to the surface that we don't speak about, from poverty to protecting democracy to postpartum depression to, the mental health issues that we all deal with and our children deal with. So I'm very proud of how the work and the industry is evolving to tackle real issues. And it's not just about beautiful work, it's about work that leaves impact and even pushes for change in legislation, in policies, and we saw that firsthand. So that's one of my top takeaways. Another thing that I have to say while I have the mic is I'm very proud of the work that we saw from the region as well. We were lucky enough to judge international work, and it was heartwarming to see that the work that came out of our region was equal, if not better, in some instances. So that was very, very nice to see as well. And one last takeaway that I think is worth also discussing is brands are making a genuine effort to connect with their target markets beyond sticking with their brand guidelines. One of the most memorable ones is Coca-Cola that Sarah mentioned, because they actually were brave enough to say, forget our brand guidelines, forget our logo, do whatever you like. And you know what? We're going to celebrate it, make a book out of it, create new packaging. So I could go on, but these are, I think, the top takeaways for me.
I
I
think
think that's
I'm just
brilliant.
gonna,
Sure,
sorry,
no.
I know if I'm just gonna jump in and echo what Dina was saying, because that was what stood out for me as well, the absolute nuance and specificity in all of the entries that we viewed, like most of the entries that we viewed. It really showed that, like, what stood out for me, and as Dina said, for her as well, and for all of us, I think, and made the cases resonate, is that people and their experiences and their feelings and the quality of their life and was centralized in all of the products without making it so niche. So the product was about the people, but it wasn't only about this specific group so much that I couldn't also resonate with it. I couldn't also see myself there. It was what made a difference for me. And in the cases that, yes, they were beautifully crafted, as we said, and they were nice results for the business, but it really, really showed impact and the meaningfulness when I could see how it impacted the people in the real world. So I'm
I
not going
think
to repeat
that's
everything the
beautiful.
ladies just said. I just
That
wanted to
is
underline that
beautiful.
part.
No, but I like that this echoes around. It's not that each one of us have different takeaways, but there is this sense of a collective understanding that, and I like the way Dina and Sarah put it as well, is we're not just following best practices across the globe. Our work has become on par, if not better, than what's happening around the globe, and we're setting benchmarks. And we saw this across, I mean, even with campaign and the work that we've seen and we've been publishing, we've seen global responses to it, critique coming in saying that this is quite incredible given the budgets that you have, given the objectives that were set. This is going beyond mere effectiveness that we were talking about. This is going beyond mere brand and business outcomes. Like Dina said, this is more than just commercial success. This is about making an impact in people's lives. This is about, pushing legislation. This is about storytelling for a cause, for meaning. And that is beautiful, knowing that you've moved the needle even the slightest bit. I want to come back to one point that Sarah mentioned in passing, is that people are using the latest tools, and I know that we're addressing this big elephant in the room called generative AI right now. We're moving to agentic AI. We're talking shopping agents and how that's changing the search and engagement game completely. But there are a lot of these creative or slash innovative tools, strategies, ideas that have been spoken about through the year. But I like the way Sarah put it, because she said that the campaigns that stood out are not the campaigns that are just using it for the sake of using it, are not using it just for the sake of saying that, oh, we're on board with the latest innovation, but they're using it in context for the right reasons, right? And building on that conversation, Akriti, I'll come to you. Why was this impressive from a creative and innovative point of view in the current context, given the current state of the market, that they are not only innovating or being creative, like you mentioned right at the start, but in the right context, to the right people, in the right way?
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting, when we talk about innovation in creativity, I think it goes back, Anup, a little bit to what you were saying. We always think we're like, oh, Gen AI is coming out. At some point of time, metaverse was the thing, and we think innovation and creativity means that. But in fact, innovation is really about looking at the problem in slightly different ways and allowing creativity to play a role in spaces that it wasn't necessarily allowed in before, right? And I think when we were looking at some of the real standout work that came out from this year and the kind of strategies, if you try and uncover or deconstruct the strategies, I think one of the things we really notice is that creativity felt like it was moving upstream. It was no longer confined to comes at the end of the funnel, where you've already defined what your product is or what it is you're communicating, and creativity only comes into how we are communicating. I think more than just storytelling the product or the service or the brand, we're playing a role in actually designing that experience itself, designing that offering itself. And we've said it in so many ways. Unilever talks about it as brand say versus brand do. And we saw a lot of that, right? There was a lot more of brand do. In fact, I think one of the works that we really spoke about very, very highly was this brand, an intimacy care brand that actually it's called Billy Boy. It reframed their core product promise, digitized it, and actually turned this product innovation and a digital experience that brought the brand to life. It solved a problem. It also became a conversation driver, right? So I think that's one thing, like creativity is moving upstream. I think the second shift that we saw, and strategies that work really well for brands, is that don't just talk to your customers, don't just talk to people, invite them, allow them to participate. And I think brands, as everyone talks, we have to be at the speed of culture, we have to constantly have a finger on the pulse of what's happening. Brands sometimes tend to just participate in culture or just borrow in culture, but the ones that can actually contribute to it, become a part of it, are the ones that succeed, right? And I think we saw great examples of Heinz, for example, that collaborated with a DJ Mustard. It was the perfect matchup for the brand, and it created something that sat in culture first. It wasn't added to it. It sat there. It didn't feel promotional. It felt very participatory. And I think I think that the third one that really stood out, and the ladies actually spoke about it earlier, was that there was this heightened sense of emotional intelligence, call it insights, call it a knack for understanding the people, a knack for understanding culture. And I think back to what Noor said, right? She's talking about purpose, but purpose does not necessarily mean changing the law. There was sensitivity to it. It wasn't just necessarily, sentimental work, but there was a lot of emotions to it. It was very magnetic. I think we saw brands that took tensions head on. They also tapped into very universal themes of like burnout or loneliness or nostalgia and pride. And I think what back to what we were also talking about earlier, there was this collective consciousness that was tapped into from a consumer point of view, right? And also using some of these emotions to broach very tough topics. So we saw Libres, really use that authentic, absurd humor as a Trojan horse for even taboo topics that have typically been behind closed doors. So I think all of these are very clever plays by brands and strategies that, in fact, all of us can learn from.
I love that. And I think it echoes really well what Noor said earlier as well about, product for the people. It's about the people. And, I love this concept of creativity moving upstream. I mean, to be honest, I'll be very honest on this conversation. It's nice to hear this optimism, for an industry that's going through so much on a difficult sense. This attrition is high, margins are low, competition is really high, but to see this level of optimism within the industry is excellent. I
If
love the
I
concept
may,
that you, yeah,
yeah, Anup, I think on that, right? We always say we feel like this industry is dying or it's under pressure. And I think the reality is that our definition of it is, right?
yeah,
And I think if anything, this year's Gerety has shown us that creativity is
we're
really
thriving.
unleashed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that aspect that you mentioned about, it's not about just merely understanding people or talking to them. It's about co-creating with them, be a part of that community. I like the word that you used, participatory, and it's something that I've been preaching to my teams as well here is we're moving from the war for time and attention to an age where empathy and trust is going to become the core cornerstones of what marketing needs to be in the near future, given where we are. Noora, I want to, and Sarah, I want to jump in with you on this as well. Sarah, from your point of view, you mentioned AI in your previous answer, but in terms of creative and innovative strategies that stood out and why they stood out and why they make a difference this year, what do you have to add to that?
I love what Akriti mentioned, which is actually what innovation really is. Because usually, innovation in our head is associated with technology, and
Technology.
they're completely different things. And this really brings us back that it's not really about, let's say, fancy the equipment or the tools. It really goes back to the ideas themselves and the value that they add, which is something very important, where they start, what are they doing. And here, if let's say we're going to talk about innovative strategies, let's say it would be the power of the unexpected. So, for example, especially in categories such as B2B, you would again associate that with, okay, B2B, it's they're traditional, they might be dry, or there are a lot of limitations in a category like that. However, we have seen entries that completely, at least for me, redefined what creativity can look like in a space like B2B. So you had some of the entries had really sharp insights and very brave execution, and they challenged the idea that B2B actually has to be boring, let's say, because no, it doesn't. We have seen entries that proves otherwise. They can be emotional and even disruptive. Now, personally, and let's go back to these strategies. And as someone who is, let's say, I have this weak spot with anything that has a social responsibility, let's say, or coming with a social responsibility lens. I was deeply moved by a lot of campaigns. I'm not going to say which case films, but I did have tears, coming down in some of these because of the major issues that they tackled, from violence to health to equality and climate. And the great thing, again, it's not only awareness, even loud awareness is amazing, of course, but again, a lot of initiatives that actually offer actionable solutions. And Yeah, it's something that is truly inspiring, really, to see brands getting out of their shell. I love what you mentioned about creativity going out of its lane, and I think it's the best way, to describe that. And truly, with let's say the human experience evolving, regardless of the tools, I believe creativity also will evolve and will keep on surprising us.
I love that. Creativity will keep surprising us. I like the way the conversation keeps going back to the word impact, whether it is in terms of creativity, whether it's in terms of innovation, whether it's in terms of, purpose that was initially mentioned, whether it's in terms of the tools that we're doing it. It goes back to the why of what we're doing. And Akriti mentioned collective consciousness. Dina, you mentioned community and work that has impact going beyond the commercial success, storytelling, but not just storytelling for a sake, but like Sarah mentioned, something that brings tears to your eyes, something that sticks with you, something that you want to go back and talk to your friends about, your family about. What
No.
Oh no, we might have lost Anup temporarily.
Wow, lost you there for a sec. Am I back on?
Welcome back.
Yes.
Welcome back.
What I would do, that was really quick. It was a very quick glitch. What I would do to be a fly on the wall is what I wanted to say in that room or in this virtual chat room when you were discussing this or having this or going through each of the submissions. Dina, I want to come to you. It must have been a magical feeling being in a room, taking part of something special alongside these talented women, among all the other talented women in the room. For those of you who, for those of us listening or watching this at a later stage, who didn't get a chance to have that experience, how would you describe it?
I think it was truly an honor to be with all these amazing ladies. The talent in the room was so clear. I think we all felt an immense sense of responsibility. We really wanted to do the right thing by everyone. We had a great leadership from Prerna, who's not with us now, but she did start the meeting by saying, women, we're different. we're different and we have a huge responsibility because there's no one here to defend the work. And I really carried that with me through the judging as well, because we really felt that we had to defend the work because there was no one presenting the work. But for me, on a personal level, I'm very passionate about seeing women in leadership. And it was a real honor for me to be part of this jury. And I really have to say thank you to the Gerety Awards for shining a light on women leaders. And I know our industry gives a lot of chances to women more than other industries. But even so, it was lovely to meet these women, but also to see women succeeding is a joy. Ladies, if any of you would like to add anything, because I could go on and on about this topic.
What I
I
found
mean,
interesting,
Go
Akriti,
ahead.
you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
go ahead, Noor.
Okay. What I found very interesting within the room is we all had common experiences throughout life as women, but we all also had a lot of nuance viewing all of the different campaigns, all the different projects, all the different cases because of our regions as well. So it was very interesting seeing how we perceived a lot of the ideas here in the Middle East versus how our colleagues that joined us from the South African region viewed stuff. And understanding each other and where we were coming from gave me at least a new understanding of a lot of the campaigns and flipped the script on how I viewed them before when I was seeing them in isolation versus afterwards when I was seeing them with this group of my peers. So even though we have a lot of the same experiences through life, we face a lot of the same problems in our careers, it's there's still all of that differences, all of that nuance that builds into how we view things. That I was eye-opening for me at least, and I really appreciated being in that room with all those people, seeing those different viewpoints, learning new things from them as we taught them new things. It was really, really like a nice experience for me.
Wonderful. Akriti?
I mean, the ladies have echoed everything. I think the only additional point that I would say, and as just as an observer in the room, having been in a lot of these rooms, what really stood out is the positivity and the constructive care nature with which we approached the work. You could, as Dina said, we really felt this responsibility to talk up the work. At no point of time were we criticizing it, but we were always looking for what were constructive builds or what were ways that the work could have been elevated. And I think that was beautiful because we know the challenges that go into creating work, from the clients, from brand marketeers themselves having to be brave and sell these things internally. So it was beautiful to see the amount of respect that was given to the work that came in front of us.
I like the shout out to Prerna Mehra as well from Dina. I like this collective consciousness, this thought, constructive work, and like Noor said, context is everything. The more you understand the context behind why things were done in a certain way, the more empathy you have to understanding them, build within them, grow within them. Sarah, I'll conclude with you because you did mention, I think you were one of the few who went into the fact that things are great, but things can be better. And I'll touch upon a point that you mentioned is that I think the word you used was insincere work, staged or insincere work, that we need to move past it. So for those who may not win this year, or for those who may not make the cut this year, if I can use that phrase, as a jury member, what would your parting advice be for those looking to either build on their submissions, and sometimes it's not even about having a great piece of work or campaign that you put out there. Sometimes it is about the submission itself. Is it presented well? Is there a good video to back it? Is the submission story told as well as the campaign is story told? And in that sense, what would be your parting advice to people sharing what they have to do? So an outlook for the industry and saying this is how we can get better as an industry, and for those making the submission saying this is how your submissions can be a bit better.
No, Anap, first of all, I like how you asked this question, and already from the way you're asking it, I feel there's this telepathy, let's say, in what I'm thinking. And I will go back to this collective consciousness because I believe it will be my new best word, you know. But I will be very practical about that. Now, first, regarding insincere or staged work, we're not going to even go there. Let's say this is a base, but let's say no, there's this team working on this amazing project. It has all the right ingredients. What I would actually, let's say my parting advice would be, do not underestimate the case film. It is about the story. And this, of course, will also echo a lot of things that Dina mentioned regarding responsibility, regarding the fact that the people are not there to defend their work nor tell the story. So coming back to that, and when we're talking about the case film, I like to think, let's say, about the entry itself or the project and the case film. So you have this creative project that you're working on. Even the case film should be treated as such, as if it's its own creative project, you know, from the beginning to the end, how we're going to start this story. And the thing is, no matter how great the idea is, if it's not told well, it won't land. The case film is the only, let's say, chance in this room. It's for entry, for entrance. It's your pitch, it's your proof, and it's your emotional hook, and the chance to connect really. And with the jury, let's say, think with humans. You know, by the end of the day, how can you make it really connect and resonate? How can you tell the story? I would definitely encourage teams to pre-plan, you know, the narrative from the get-go. So the project, the case film, they go in parallel, and how we're going to actually give justice to this initiative that we're creating, to think beyond the execution, clearly define the problem, if possible, even to get, let's say, footage or glimpses to really make us feel your context, you know, where you're coming from, why it matters, and why now? Why does it matter today? All of these things really play a major role in us looking at the work, even if it's a very simple solution, on how it actually works and how it solves that problem. And most importantly, of course, this is something can happen with the overwhelm, you know, of it all. And because it would be a great, of course, honor to be recognized, the best entries are not necessarily the most complex. On the other hand, they're the ones that are more single-minded, with clarity, consistency, and legs. And this, as a great solid idea, can actually travel and grow in a much more powerful way than any layered or polished idea can do. And yeah,
That's
it's so
perfect.
exciting. Yes, definitely.
What a wonderful way to wrap up that discussion. Thank you so much to each of you for a genuine contribution to not only helping the industry move forward, but helping each of us as individuals move forward. Thank you for the time and effort that goes into such initiatives outside of our daily grind of work and home and everything else that we do and love. It's been such a pleasure talking to each of you. I know that we can go on for hours and I've got so many more questions, but we'll meet and catch up another day. And with that, we come to the end of this discussion. Thank you all for being here once again.
Thank you very
And
much.
thank you. Thank you to the Gerety Awards, to campaign, to all the women here and everyone in the jury. I leave it to you, Dina.
Thank